Where is the light that shines in the darkness? Where do we turn when all hope is lost? Let us prepare our hearts and minds as we hear our prelude. Please join me in the call to worship. Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
We heard the hollow echo of silence once spoken in love.
Were you in the garden when the disciples fell asleep? Were you in the courtyard when the cock crowed? Were you among the scoffers when Jesus was flogged? Were you in Pilate's chamber when he washed his hands of Jesus' fate? Were you with the powers of this world when the soldiers dressed Jesus as a king? Were you among the spectators at Golgotha? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Let us join together now in our opening hymn, Were You There? You may remain seated.
Were
Let us pray. Elusive One, oh, that our eyes were a fountain of tears, to weep for ourselves and our world. Where do you go when all hope fades? Where do you hide when we cry out with the psalmist, my God, why have you forsaken me?" In the midst of our pain and despair, we strain to see you arriving in the nick of time. Yet in our disbelief and dismay, we face the emptiness of your absence and the ache of our despair. Your ways are beyond us, Holy One, shrouding us in mystery. Be with us in our hour of greatest need. Most of all, do not abandon us when we deny you. Amen.
Our first reading is from the Gospel according to St. Luke. May God add his blessing to the reading of the word. Jesus left and made his way to the Mount of Olives, as was his custom, and the disciples followed him. When he arrived, he said to them, "Pray that you won't give in to temptation." He withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down, and prayed. He said, "Father, if it's your will, take this cup of suffering away from me. However, not my will, but your will must be done." Then a heavenly angel appeared to him and strengthened him. He was in anguish and prayed even more earnestly. His sweat became like drops of blood falling on the ground. When he got up from praying, he went to the disciples, and he found them asleep. Overcome by grief, he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up. Pray so that you won't give in to temptation." While Jesus was still speaking, a crowd appeared, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him. Jesus said to him, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" When those around him recognized what was about to happen, they said, "Lord, should we fight with our swords?" And one of them struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. Jesus responded, "Stop! No more of this." He touched the slave's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come to get him, "Have you come with swords and clubs to arrest me, as though I were a thief? Day after day I was with you in the temple, but you didn't arrest me. But this is your time, when darkness rules."
Reading from the Gospel of John. Then the company of soldiers, the commander, and the guards from the Jewish leaders took Jesus into custody. They bound him and led him first to Annas. He was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it was better for one person to die for the people. Please join in singing verses 1 and 2 of hymn number 290, Go to Dark Gethsemane.
Go to dark
A reading from the Gospel of Luke. Peter denies knowing Jesus. After they arrested Jesus, they led him away and brought him to the high priest's house. Peter followed from a distance. When they lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. Then a servant woman saw him sitting in the firelight. She stared at him and said, "This man was with him too." But Peter denied it, saying, "Woman, I don't know him." A little while later, someone else saw him and said, "You are one of them too." But Peter said, "Man, I not." An hour or so later, someone else insisted, "This man must have been with him because he is a Galilean too." Peter responded, "Man, I don't know what you are talking about." And at that very moment, while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. And Peter remembered the Lord's words, "Before a rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And Peter went out and cried uncontrollably.
Would you join with me responsively in the litany? There is no warmth in the fire. The one we love is in peril. Strangers recognize our fellowship with Jesus. There is no warmth in the fire.
Reading from the Gospel according to St. John. Meanwhile, the chief priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered, "I've spoken openly to the world. I've always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews gather. I've said nothing in private. So why ask me? Ask those who heard what I told them. They know what I said." After Jesus spoke, one of the guards standing there slapped Jesus in the face. "Is that how you would answer the high priest?" he said. Jesus replied, "If I speak wrongly, testify about what was wrong. But if I speak correctly, why do you strike me?"
Reading from the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus before Pilate. Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people reached the decision to have Jesus put to death. They bound him, led him away, and turned him over to Pilate, the governor.
reading from the Gospel of Matthew. Judas's death. When Judas, who betrayed Jesus, saw that Jesus was condemned to die, he felt deep regret. He returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders and said, "I did wrong because I betrayed an innocent man." But they said, "What is that to us? That's your problem." Judas threw the silver pieces into the temple and left. Then he went and hanged himself. The chief priests picked up the silver pieces and said, "According to the law, it's not right to put this money into the treasury. Since it was used to pay for someone's life, it's unclean." So they decided to use it to buy the potter's field where strangers could be buried. That's why that field is called Field of Blood to this very day. This fulfilled the words of Jeremiah the prophet. "And I took 30 pieces of silver, the price for the one whose price had been set by some of the Israelites, and I gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me."
Would you join with me in the litany? Jesus stands condemned.
Wait, stop this madness.
It is too late.
We repent of our sin.
You have been well paid.
We don't want your blood money.
It is yours all the same.
Please stop this madness.
It is too late.
Reading from the Gospel according to John. Pilate went back into the palace. He summoned Jesus and asked, "Are you the King of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this on your own, or have others spoken to you about me?" Pilate responded, "I'm not a Jew, am I? Your nation and its chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus replied, "My kingdom does not originate from this world. If it did, my guards would fight so that I wouldn't have been arrested by the Jewish leaders. My kingdom isn't from here." "So you are a king?" Pilate said. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. I was born and came into the world for this reason, to testify to the truth. Whoever accepts the truth listens to my voice." "What is truth?" Pilate asked. After Pilate said this, he returned to the Jewish leaders and said, "I find no grounds for any charge against him." Let us join together in singing hymn 292.
What wondrous love
Reading from the Gospel of Matthew. It was customary during the festival for the governor to release to the crowd one prisoner, whomever they might choose. At that time, there was a well-known prisoner named Jesus Barabbas. When the crowd had come together, Pilate asked them, "Whom would you like me to release to you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called Christ?" He knew that the leaders of the people had handed him over because of jealousy. While he was serving as judge, his wife sent this message to him: "Leave that righteous man alone. I've suffered much today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and kill Jesus. The governor said, "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" "Barabbas," they replied. Pilate said, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" They all said, "Crucify him." But he said, "Why? What wrong has he done?" And they shouted even louder, "Crucify him." Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere and that a riot was starting. So he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I'm innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It's your problem."
Please join me in the prayer of confession. Holy mystery, our faith stands upon a knife's edge. We long to stand up for what we believe, but it is easier to wash our hands of responsibility and to blame others for our inaction. We yearn to take a principled and courageous stand, but it is easier to defer to the judgment of others and simply go along with the crowd. We dream of following Jesus to the end, but it is easier to slip into the darkness and betray the Spirit striving within us. Forgive us, O God, and help us find our courage amidst the dying of the light. Hear these words of assurance. Though we walk through the valley of the shadow of darkness, God is with us. Amen.
Continuing from the Gospel according to Matthew. Then he released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus whipped, then handed him over to be crucified. The governor's soldiers took Jesus into the governor's house, and they gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a red military coat on him. They twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They put a stick in his right hand. Then they bowed down in front of him and mocked him, saying, "Hey, King of the Jews!" After they spit on him, they took the stick and struck his head again and again. When they finished mocking him, they stripped him of the military coat and put his own clothes back on him. They led him away to crucify him. Please join in the singing of hymn number 286, O Sacred Head Now Wounded.
Reading from Matthew and then from John. As they were going out, they found Simon, a man from Cyrene. They forced him to carry his cross. When they came to a place called Golgotha, which means skull place, they gave Jesus wine mixed with vinegar to drink. But after tasting it, he didn't want to drink it. After they crucified him, they divided up his clothes among them, drawing lots. They sat there guarding him, and they placed above his head the charge against him. It read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. Therefore the Jewish chief priest complained to Pilate, "Don't write the King of the Jews, but this man said, 'I am King of the Jews.'"
Reading from the Gospel of Luke. The people were standing around watching, but the leaders sneered at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he really is the Christ sent from God, the chosen one." One of the criminals hanging next to Jesus insulted him. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us." Responding, the other criminal spoke harshly to him. "Don't you fear God, seeing that you've also been sentenced to die? We are rightly condemned, for we are receiving the appropriate sentence for what we did. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus replied, "I assure you that today you will be with me in paradise." Please join in singing "Jesus, Remember Me" in the hymnal on page 488. We will sing it twice.
Please join me in the litany. Come to the cross and feel the weight of the world.
We bring the weight of our sins.
Come to the cross and feel the weight of the world.
We bring the weight of our desertions and our betrayals.
come to the cross and feel the weight of the world. We bring the weight of our accusations and our scorn. Come to the cross and feel the weight of the world.
We bring the weight of our lives.
A reading from the Gospel according to Mark. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, the whole earth was dark. At 3, Jesus cried out with a loud shout, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you left me?"
Continuing with the Gospel of Mark. After hearing him, some standing there said, "Look, he's calling Elijah." Someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, and put it on a pole. He offered it to Jesus to drink, saying, "Let's see if Elijah will come to take him down."
Reading from the Gospel according to Matthew. Again, Jesus cried out with a loud shout. Then he died. And look, the curtain of the sanctuary was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook. The rocks split.
Christ is in the tomb. The light of the world has been taken from us, and we are left in darkness. I invite you to join in our closing hymn, "'Tis finished, the Messiah dies."